All right, looks like we are live. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Simply Tech Live broadcast, a broadcast that we are doing perhaps, I don't know, once every 2 weeks or so right now, Ali?
We kind of changed it because of the situation, but I think we're getting back to our regular thing.
Yeah, and we were focusing a lot on the COVID-based technology that Microsoft was releasing into the ecosystem. But today we're focusing on the human component of technology. We have an awesome guest on today. So Ali, I'll let you introduce our amazing guest for today.
Well, I mean, it took us some time because she has a super duper busy schedule, but I'm very excited. And again, Caitlin's going to go ahead and introduce herself. But what I can tell is that she's an amazing friend. And based on certain circumstances that maybe you have a time to just talk about it today, I got to meet Caitlin, and I can tell you she's one of the greatest human beings that I ever met. And hopefully when she goes through, what she does on a day-to-day basis, as part of her job, our audience will get it, what I'm talking about. So with that said, Caitlin, maybe you can formally introduce yourself. Sorry, I'm not having my bow tie and my formal dress, but it's important.
It's the work from home look. Thanks so much for having me, you guys. I was honored to be asked to join you. My name's Caitlin McCabe. I work in the office of the CEO at Microsoft and look after Satya's communications with a great group of folks that we have on our team. And I've been in this role for almost 6.5 years since Satya became CEO in February of 2014, and have been at Microsoft for the last decade. I can believe it. It's hard to believe. Working in a variety of communications roles, both on the product side as well as supporting our business segments.
Now, one thing that I want to talk about a little bit is that for people that are following Microsoft and Satya specifically, now that you know Caitlin, if you look at the pictures or some videos, there is a very good chance that you're going to see her in the background, that actively moving back and forth. And this is good to just for everybody to understand that when we have these public events and when you have a CEO of a big company like Satya going on stage and talking about, there's a lot going on. I look at Caitlin more like a secretary of press. Do you think is a good analogy or is not?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about how communications has evolved and continues to evolve. And you think about how do you take kind of the most precious asset, or communications asset that we have as a company, which is the voice of the CEO, and make sure that you're using it in a really focused and targeted way to have the greatest impact and scale and reach you can have to achieve the company's objectives and mission ultimately. And so that can span a number of different channels, from speeches and events like what we did with our Build Developers conferences this week, to social media, to written communications, etc.
So, Caitlin, I'd love to understand, when we first connected, it was, for a layman, when we think about communications, just to Ali's point, it's very hard to understand exactly what you're doing. And it sounds like cultivating that message, it's a very broad use case for what you do on a daily basis. What are you seeing evolving here in the past 6 months, 12 months, even maybe from the time that Satya stepped in terms of why communications is so important for our organization?
Yeah, I think just even in the past few years, and Satya's talked about this quite a bit, it's just become more acutely apparent the multi-constituent world we're living in. As a company, as in a technology industry, I think every corporation. And when you really look at the purpose of a corporation, I think there's a lot more scrutiny involved in what is the purpose. It has to extend beyond creating shareholder value. So thinking about what is the impact that you're having in the communities where you operate, on economies broadly and on society broadly. And so thinking about how do you kind of tell that story, either shift perception or grow awareness of what you're doing in these different areas with all of the different stakeholders and constituents that matter, from governments to customers to developers or partners to people generally around the world.
Is that, and like, now, how do you build proxy? Like, I would personally have a problem building proximity to that. It's so, we talk about empathy and we talk about diversity, and it's such an important thing in our organization. What does it look like to even understand that multi-constituent world? Like, I know you have a pretty sizable team, but like, what does that journey look like in understanding that?
Yeah, I think it really starts with getting an understanding. I think to understand the global impact that you have, or kind of the global responsibility that you have, it starts with understanding the local impact and the local action you can take everywhere in the world where you are, and seeing that firsthand. So how is it that in a local economy, you're helping small businesses become more productive? You're giving entrepreneurs a path to creating a larger business. You're helping large enterprises scale. You're helping the public sector better serve its citizens. You're putting tools in the hands of people who wouldn't previously have access to them, which creates new opportunity. And all of that leads to growing economies at scale and creating global impact. But I think where I get a lot of energy is seeing those individual stories of people making a difference where maybe it's unexpected in some sense.
And I can tell you that she has a passion because that's how we met, and we were amazed. And to me, I mean, that was one of the crucial moments back then. Just kind of made me believe that, hey, really at Microsoft we have a mission. And when we talk about empathy, it's not just a word. We mean it. And this is the reason. It's all about how we communicate and how we connect with people.
And Ali, I mean, and you guys are friends and you guys know each other well. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys met specifically? And I mean, you're such a good center of space for organizationally how we look at empathy just locally. Like, can you talk a little bit about that, your experience there, and how you guys met, what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, so the story is about like 5 years ago. As you know, we were going through this diagnosis of my son when he was diagnosed with diabetes. And back then, me along another members community, we were trying to see how we can leverage technology. One of the challenges back then that we noticed was that families that were trying to use our cloud offering, Azure, and they were using the trial version of it, which was getting expired. And this was such a important components for them to be able to monitor their blood glucose information real time to help their loved one and kids. And losing that capability was very harsh for them. And for most of them, they didn't have the fund to be able to go and get a subscription. So internally, I reached out to Satya and the other LT members of the team. I said, what are you going to do is let me just reach out and, see what we can do. And within, I would say, a couple of hours, I got an email from Caitlin. And that's how we met. I said, hey, looks like, there are some ways that we can help. And that turned into, a very great chain of events. We managed, with the support of Satya and all the LT, to get subscription for all those families. And that turned into a really great story, and it continued. And the best part of it is just like the friendship that came to fruition between me and Caitlin. And regardless of the work and what she does and what I do, we're always in contact.
Yeah, I think Satya got Ali's email, I think forwarded it to me and some other folks on the team and said, we should look at this, find out more about this, and see what we can do. And then a few months down the road, so we connected, and a few months down the road, we were getting ready for a speech at our large internal sales conference. And at that time, we were talking a lot about our cultural transformation as a company, and this notion of how do you use Microsoft as a platform to connect your personal passion with the impact that you can have broadly in the world. And we were just trying to find like a great story a real story that could illustrate that. And Ali popped into my head, and I remembered the conversations that we had had a few months ago. And that is the story that, one of the stories that Satya shared on stage. And it was a really beautiful moment. But I do think it just illustrates so well the impact that one individual can have, not just improving the life of his own son, but then actually making a difference within that community.
Which, we have so many stories like that, right? And I see it part of, the impact coming through all this effort and, how to connect the dots and how to bring that human element of the thing versus, I remember 10, 15 years ago, it was all about business and numbers and quotas and this and that. But now, today, empathy is upfront behind anything.
Yeah.
I really like, and that's a great story because, that's essentially, and I work out in the field. I'm not in Redmond, but even at my level, I am incentivized based upon the impact that I'm having on others, colleagues, customers, how I'm leveraging impact of others. And there's continuously this story of collaboration and really getting closer, having additional proximity to different challenges. One of the things that you mentioned, having taking a personal passion and driving impact against that. And when you talk about Ali's story, that's just one little story amongst all these stories you're seeing. So like, what are some additional stories that come to mind on a global scale that have touched you and that you feel like the organization did a very good job with crafting communication around?
Yeah. There's a wonderful story in a person I met named Samit in the UK. And Samit worked at London Heathrow Airport. His father had worked there for his entire career as in security. So I think the equivalent of the TSA that they have at London Heathrow. And Samit followed in his footsteps. He met his wife on the job there. And that was really his path in life, what he thought was his path. And he was kind of inspired to create a better process in what had been like a laborious, paper-based, very manual, labor-intensive process around translation and language barriers with all of the global passengers who were coming through. And he did his own homework and he figured out how to build an app using our Power Platform tools to basically automate this process, not just for himself, but basically for the whole department. And that kind of took off. And then he started building another app and another app and another app. And this is someone who had no computer science education, hadn't been kind of given the opportunity to learn digital skills in any kind of formal setting, but kind of had the ingenuity and the passion himself, and then took what he could find in the organization and just started building these apps. And eventually the IT department took notice, and they gave him a job in IT and kind of set him on an entirely new career path. And he's become a bit of a hometown hero himself, and he now goes to speak at different places. But it was just such a beautiful story. And he's such a wonderful person because he recognized the opportunity that this gave him, but also how we need to make that opportunity more accessible to more people. And so I think he's really taken that to heart, and he's doing his part to share his story more broadly to help inspire and show others what a path can look like.
I remember that story when Sadia was talking about it on stage. And this is the fun part, like, the history behind it, that what happened that caused, that story to be featured as part of his speech, which, every time, he talks, there is impact. There's like human element. That's what I love.
Yeah.
So I thought one really fun, and when we were connecting, just preparing for this discussion, Caitlin, you were talking about how your team tends to craft experiences when Satya makes visits to other countries, and I didn't even know that was a thing for leaders to do that. I just thought that was really cool. And can you talk a little bit about what that is, like the importance of crafting an experience for how a leader would engage with their audience, and maybe something that you've learned from that?
Yeah, I think, it started, I think, in Microsoft, we have such a global footprint that I think for most of our history, our leadership teams, our CEOs and other executive leaders have done a great job of going out into the world and meeting our teams and our customers around the world. And I think that's a core part of our DNA. And so it's something that we call the CEO field visit, where he'll, spend a week in a certain region, visiting a number of countries, a different country each day. And as you can imagine, it can be a pretty jam-packed 8-hour schedule, because when you're have 8 hours of the CEO's time and you want to give him a tour of the country, it becomes kind of a whirlwind thing, and you tend to pack as much as you can in. And when we, after Satya became CEO, and we really kind of got on our path of charting what our mission was to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more and transforming our culture, those are the North Stars of our company. They're enduring, and it's what we kind of start and end every speech with. And we really took that to heart, to thinking about, if we were to testify in a court of law that Satya actually cared about empowering every person, every organization on the planet, what's the body of evidence that we would present to show that we were walking the talk? And so we focused on shifting the agenda of our field tours a bit, to carve out a little bit more time to go out into the world and to meet real people who are using technology in unexpected ways and unexpected places. And it also, I think, had a beautiful side effect in enabling him to learn a lot more and just get a better sense of the world. And I think that's so important, that you can travel somewhere, but if you're stuck in a conference room that looks like a lot like the conference rooms that you have back home, you can meet interesting people, but you're not learning as much as if you actually see the environment where people live and work. And so we've had some really beautiful experiences, whether going to hospitals, like a children's hospital in Chile, where we saw firsthand how they, doctors and staff there were applying Connect to help rehabilitate children who were suffering from brain injuries, to a 16-year-old girl in Latin America who learned robotics, but then kind of commandeered and started classes for her peers at local libraries to teach them robotics. And one story that really stuck out for me was in Cairo, in Egypt. We partnered, our local team there partnered with an organization to create an innovation hub to bring young women from nearby towns and villages into Cairo and teach them digital skills and computer science. And a group of them had actually built this app for Syrian refugees to be able to find and identify local resources, and help better understand the language. And it was kind of this beautiful moment where these young women who were now given access to technology found a way to make a connection with a group of people who they would probably never have the opportunity to cross paths with or have, a connection with. And yet they were doing something to impact their lives. And I think you see those kind of points of light everywhere you go. And I think that just illustrates what is possible when you actually can get tools to more people to kind of enable them to light up their own ingenuity.
I have a question for you. So I was watching the segment on PBS the other day that they had Satya on it. And the conversation was rolling, how the technology is going to impact the way we're going to work post-COVID-19. And one thing that Satya mentioned, which just kind of stuck in my mind, was that how he misses that human interaction element still, as you're going and before and after the meeting, you have a conversation with people. How do you think our technology or, whatever that people are using to communicate these days is going to evolve in the next couple of years as we kind of adapt to this new normal.
I think it's so interesting because we're using technology like never before. And I think there's some good, right? Because I think without the infrastructure that we have today in this crisis, we'd be in a much worse place. And we're relying on technology. For those of us who have the privilege of working from home, as the three of us do, it's enabled us to kind of maintain productivity and business continuity. But you think about it, and it's like none of this technology was ever designed to fundamentally replace human connection. I think technology has always been created to like augment the human experience. And I think that it can feel a little bit isolating when you get to this place that's more focused on replacement rather than augmentation. And I think that's where, we're going to go through, I think, this period of like hybrid work where you have some folks who are in the workplace, some folks who continue to work remotely, and there's going to be new cultural norms established as part of that. And I think it's really, but I think one of the beautiful things actually that I've seen come out of this is how we're using technology to make meetings and collaboration more inclusive. For example, I think there are folks I work with who I've found over the last few weeks value more ad hoc IM conversations in teams, where other people value having more of a structured call each day. And other folks kind of want to have the drive-by quick 5-minute phone conversation as they would just drive by your office. But I also think it's like enabled us to allow people to participate or be heard in meetings in new ways, whether it's like the raise hand feature in Teams, where you might be in a physical meeting room with someone and they might not feel like they can raise their hand and say something and speak up. And so I hope some of those habits that we're building right now to be more inclusive and to have more voices heard in the workplace are carried forward even when we find ourselves shifting back to being more in person, if that makes sense.
It does. So having a kid with disability myself, to me, accessibility is very important when you think about designing software and tools that can help everyone. So, be, very inclusive. How do you, within your team, I'm sure that, you may have people that they have some sort of, disabilities, but they still want to be productive. Can you share, what you and your team currently doing to make sure that, everybody, feels included as part of the conversation, and how the technology is helping?
Yeah, it's a great one. There's a woman I work with on our team named Leah Katz-Hernandez, and she is deaf. She joined Microsoft a couple of years ago. She previously worked in the Obama White House for that administration. And she has just helped me gain a much better understanding of the importance of accessibility and some of the nuances that you don't think of. And for example, at the outset of when we started working from home, she sent me some photos and a write-up of just her documenting her experience and what it was like to have to make sure that she had the interpreter on the phone on one screen, and then she had all the meeting participants on the other screen, and we have to ensure that we're pinning her so that we can see her even though she's muted as she's signing. And it was just such a great learning for me because it made me more acutely aware of sort of the extra steps that someone just has to take just to be able to participate, but also where things like live captioning or hand raise really, really make a huge difference in enabling her to feel like she can actually contribute to the conversation in the same way that everyone else is. And what I loved about it is that she started documenting some of her experiences and learnings on LinkedIn. So I recommend everyone follow her. But she also has channeled a lot of feedback back to our research teams and our product teams. So it's kind of this continuous learning cycle where they're able to learn from her experience and adapt and rebuild.
And I'll put a link to her profile in this live discussion. And I know, Caitlin, we only have several minutes left, but it sounds very familiar to me and Ali and yourself to be talking about beautiful experiences as a business, as a tech company, right? Like when I get off this call, I'm going to go talk about SQL Server, So it's very interesting how we care so much about these different things, but we are a business and we do have goals and objectives. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how you've grown. Just hearing you're just very well thought out. You have a lot of really great things to say. Like, how have you seen yourself grow from 6 years ago to today? And if you could share some of that with us, I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I became a mom about a year ago. We just celebrated our son's 1 year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I was really fortunate to have great parental leave, which I took, and my husband did as well, which he took. But coming back to work was kind of nerve-wracking for me. And I remember I joined an executive review meeting kind of just as I was coming back for a project that I was going to be kind of jumping on board with and helping to drive. And I sat in this meeting with people who I had worked with, who I hadn't seen in about 20 weeks. And they were all talking and everyone knew what was going on. And I was hearing these acronyms that I had never heard before. And I was like, oh my God, like they're speaking a different language. I must have I don't know what any of this means. And I was afraid to actually ask for context in that section because I was like, oh my gosh, how could I not remember all of these things?
Yeah.
But I think I also gained a better understanding of perspective from the outside and how are we talking in language that other people can actually understand and relate to and take action on. And so that was a really big learning for me. I think the other thing is just the ability to kind of learn all of these stories, meet people from all walks of life has grounded me in a deeper sense of empathy that I think I've also been fortunate to learn from Satya firsthand. And then I think becoming a mom has made me much more acutely aware of the preciousness of time. And I think in a lot of times we celebrate being a great multitasker. It was something I always sort of took pride in, that I can just multitask out of everything. I'll give it to me and I'll do it all. But I think over this past year, I've learned the importance of sometimes just being present and focused in whatever it is you're doing, whether that's work or being a mom or a parent, whatever you're doing, being present and focused in that moment, which has been a really important lesson for me personally, I think.
Thanks for sharing that, Caitlin. Well, we're right at the half. Ali, why don't you close us out and with this special conversation today?
Well, I mean, I wish we could continue. I can talk to Caitlin for hours, but I know that she's busy. She has more important stuff to do. So I really appreciate your time. And I know how hard it is to put this in your schedule, especially after build and everything that's going on. But I'm hoping that we have more conversation with you and your team. And one of the reasons that I was thinking about having you as a guest was to really showcase how individually people can make impact. If you want to work at Microsoft or other big tech companies, you don't have to be a software engineer. You have plenty of smart people, especially female, that they can do a lot of good things. And I mean, to me, everybody should look at Caitlin as a role model in terms of what's the art of possible and what you can do to be successful in your career and also make a positive impact on other people's lives. So thank you for your time, and I'm hoping that we can see you soon in this program again.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me part of the conversation.
Thanks, Caitlin. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Have a great day, y'all.
Bye.